Marcus Chen had always thought his biggest problem was explaining to his grandmother why he dropped out of engineering school to become a mechanic. That was before the sky cracked open like a broken eggshell, and massive ships descended through the atmosphere, their hulls gleaming with an otherworldly blue radiance. The Zephyrian fleet had arrived without warning, their vessels casting shadows over major cities across Earth. Unlike the invasion scenarios humans had imagined in countless movies, these aliens didn't come with weapons blazing. Instead, they broadcast a message in perfect English, Mandarin, Spanish, and dozens of other languages simultaneously. "We seek an audience with your species," the melodic voice had announced. "We come in desperate need, not conquest." Marcus was elbow deep in the engine of a 2019 Honda Civic when the first ship landed in Central Park. He watched the news coverage on his phone, grease-stained fingers swiping through live feeds of the massive crystalline vessel that had settled between the baseball fields and Bethesda Fountain. The ship looked like it was grown rather than built, its surface rippling with patterns that seemed to shift when viewed directly. Within hours, every major government had scrambled to establish contact. Presidents, prime ministers, and world leaders flew to New York, turning the city into a diplomatic circus. Marcus figured he'd watch the historic first contact from his garage in Queens, maybe grab some popcorn. He never expected the aliens to ask for him specifically. The knock came at sunset, 3 days after the landing. Marcus opened his apartment door to find two figures in black suits flanked by what he could only describe as living starlight. The alien stood 7 feet tall, its form humanoid but composed of what looked like flowing liquid mercury shot through with veins of blue electricity. When it moved, reality seemed to bend slightly around its edges. "Marcus Chen," one of the suited men said, flashing credentials that identified him as Agent Morrison from a department Marcus had never heard of. "You need to come with us." "I think you've got the wrong guy," Marcus replied, still holding a wrench in his oil-stained hand. "I fix cars for a living." The alien stepped forward, and when it spoke, its voice resonated inside Marcus's skull rather than his ears. "You are the one we seek. The Empress has chosen." 20 minutes later, Marcus found himself in the back of a black SUV racing through Manhattan traffic. The alien, who had introduced itself as Ambassador Zix, sat across from him in perfect stillness. Its form occasionally flickered, revealing glimpses of what might have been its true appearance beneath the mercury-like surface. "Chosen for what exactly?" Marcus asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Our species faces extinction," Zix replied. "For 3,000 of your years, the Zephyrian Empire has ruled over 47 star systems. We have conquered death, transcended physical limitations, and built technologies beyond your current understanding. Yet we cannot solve the one problem that will end us all." The SUV pulled up to Central Park, where military cordons had been established around the alien ship. Soldiers in full gear stepped aside as Agent Morrison flashed more credentials. Marcus noticed that several world leaders were being escorted away from the ship, their faces showing mixtures of confusion and frustration. "We've been studying your species for decades," Zix continued as they approached the vessel. "Hidden observation posts, quantum surveillance, genetic analysis of random samples. What we discovered defied all our calculations." The ship's surface parted like water as they approached, revealing an interior that seemed impossibly vast. Corridors stretched in directions that hurt Marcus's brain to contemplate, their walls alive with flowing patterns of light. Everything hummed with a frequency he felt in his bones. "Your leaders believe they were rejected because they lack sufficient authority or intelligence," Zix said, guiding Marcus through passages that seemed to rearrange themselves as they walked. "They do not understand that we care nothing for your political structures or academic achievements." They entered a chamber that defied geometry, its walls curving away into what might have been infinity. At the center stood a figure that made Ambassador Zix look ordinary by comparison. The Empress was clearly Zephyrian, but where Zix appeared as flowing mercury, she seemed to be carved from living diamond, her form refracting light into patterns that suggested vast intelligence and terrible purpose. "Empress Veltar," Zix announced. "I present Marcus Chen of Earth." The Empress studied Marcus with eyes that held the depth of stellar nurseries. When she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that seemed to originate from multiple dimensions. "Show me your hands, human." Marcus hesitated, then held up his grease-stained palms and oil-darkened fingernails. The Empress moved closer, her crystalline fingers hovering inches above his skin without quite touching. "Tell me, Marcus Chen," she said. "What do you do when something breaks?" "I fix it," Marcus replied simply. "And when the problem seems impossible? When others say it cannot be repaired?" Marcus shrugged. "I find a way. There's always a way if you're willing to get creative and maybe break a few rules." The Empress straightened, and for the first time since entering the ship, Marcus saw something that might have been emotion cross her features. Relief, perhaps, or hope. "For 3 millennia, the Zephyrian Empire has been dying," she said. "Not from war or plague, but from perfection itself. We have solved every challenge, conquered every limitation, transcended every weakness. Our technology anticipates our needs before we feel them. Our society has eliminated conflict, want, and uncertainty," she gestured, and the chamber filled with holographic images of Zephyrian worlds. Cities of impossible beauty stretched across continents, their inhabitants moving through lives of seamless harmony. Yet something felt wrong about the scenes, a sense of static perfection that made Marcus's skin crawl. "We have achieved paradise," the Empress continued, "and it is killing us. Our birth rate has declined to nearly 0. Our people lose the will to live not from despair but from the absence of purpose. When every problem is solved before it can be encountered, when every desire is fulfilled before it can be felt, existence becomes meaningless." Marcus watched the holographic cities, beginning to understand. The Zephyrians moved through their perfect world like beautiful ghosts, their actions graceful but somehow empty. There was no struggle in their movement, no urgency in their purpose, no spark of the desperate creativity that had driven human civilization forward through countless challenges. "We need what you have," the Empress said, her diamond form seeming to pulse with an inner light. "We need the ability to break, to struggle, to find solutions where none should exist. We need someone who can take our dying perfection and teach it how to be beautifully, chaotically, impossibly alive again." Marcus looked at his hands, still stained with engine oil, then back at the most powerful being in the known galaxy. "And you think a mechanic from Queens can do that?" "I think," the Empress replied, "that you're going to prove there's no such thing as impossible." Marcus spent the next 3 days aboard the Zephyrian ship, and every moment challenged his understanding of reality. The vessel existed in what Ambassador Zix called folded space, meaning it was simultaneously in Central Park and traveling through dimensions that had no names in human language. Walking from his assigned quarters to the observation deck involved passing through corridors that shouldn't exist and rooms where gravity worked more like a suggestion than a law. The crew fascinated him. Each Zephyrian appeared unique, their forms ranging from Zix's flowing Mercury appearance to others who looked like walking constellations or geometric patterns that somehow achieved consciousness. Yet, despite their incredible diversity, they all moved with the same precise, predetermined grace that had characterized the holographic citizens he'd seen. "You study us with great interest," observed Captain Mordun, whose form resembled a tree made of crystallized light. They stood in the observation lounge watching Earth rotate slowly below them. "What conclusions do you draw?" Marcus scratched his head, leaving his brown hair even more disheveled than usual. "You're all incredibly advanced, obviously, but there's something missing. You move like you're following a script that was written before you were born." An astute observation, the captain replied. "Our society has evolved beyond the need for spontaneous decision-making. Every action is calculated for optimal outcome. Every choice predetermined by algorithms that account for billions of variables. It is efficiency perfected. But where's the joy in that?" Marcus asked. "Where's the surprise? The discovery? The moment when you figure out something nobody else thought was possible?" Captain Morden's crystalline branches dimmed slightly. "These concepts, joy, surprise, discovery, they are increasingly foreign to us. Our young are born into a world where every question has been answered, every mystery solved. They see no point in asking new ones." Marcus thought about his own childhood, spent taking apart radios and rebuilding them wrong just to see what would happen. He remembered the thrill of getting an engine to run when everyone said it was beyond repair. The satisfaction of solving a problem through pure stubbornness and creative thinking. "Maybe that's the problem," he said. "You've made it impossible to fail, so you've also made it impossible to really succeed." The journey to the Zephyrian homeworld took what felt like weeks, but was actually several months compressed through their space-folding technology. Marcus used the time to learn everything he could about their civilization. The Empress provided him with access to their vast data networks, knowledge repositories, that contained the accumulated wisdom of 3,000 years of technological advancement. What he found was both awe-inspiring and deeply troubling. The Zephyrians had indeed solved virtually every problem imaginable. They had conquered death through consciousness transfer, eliminated scarcity through matter-energy conversion, and achieved perfect social harmony through predictive behavioral algorithms. Their cities were marvels of engineering that repaired themselves. Their transportation systems moved citizens to their destinations before they consciously decided where to go, and their entertainment systems provided experiences tailored to stimulate exactly the right neural pathways for optimal satisfaction. Yet birth rates had been declining for centuries. Each generation was smaller than the last, and not due to resource limitations or government policies. The Zephyrians were simply losing the desire to create new life. Why bring children into existence when every experience they might have had already been optimized and cataloged? We call it the perfection paradox, Empress Veltar explained during one of their daily conversations. Her diamond form shifted colors as she spoke, cycling through spectrums that human eyes couldn't quite process. The more perfect our society becomes, the less reason our people have to participate in it. Marcus was working on a small mechanical puzzle he'd brought from Earth, a metal brain teaser his grandfather had given him. His fingers moved automatically, manipulating the interlocking pieces while his mind processed what the Empress had told him. On Earth we have a saying, he said, not looking up from the puzzle. Perfect is the enemy of good. Maybe the problem isn't that your society is broken. Maybe the problem is that it works too well. Explain. Marcus held up the completed puzzle, then immediately began taking it apart again. This little thing has frustrated humans for generations. Some people never solve it. Others spend hours figuring it out. But the thing is, once you know the solution, it's not fun anymore. The value isn't in having it solved. The value is in the process of solving it. The Empress leaned forward, her attention focusing with an intensity that made the air around her shimmer. Continue. Your society has solved the puzzle of existence, Marcus said, his hands working the metal pieces back into their original configuration. But you've forgotten that the puzzle was never meant to stay solved. It was meant to be taken apart and put back together in new ways over and over again. You suggest we deliberately introduce inefficiency, uncertainty, suffering? Marcus finally looked up, meeting her multidimensional gaze. I suggest you introduce choice. Real choice with real consequences, good and bad ones. When they finally arrived at the Zephyrian homeworld, Marcus understood why their civilization was dying. The planet was impossibly beautiful, its cities flowing like living art across continents of carefully maintained wilderness. Every structure existed in perfect harmony with its environment. Every citizen moved through their daily existence with graceful precision, and every system functioned exactly as designed. It was the most sterile paradise Marcus had ever imagined. The Empress led him through the capital city, their path clearing automatically as citizens detected their approach and moved aside with fluid efficiency. Nobody looked curious about the strange alien walking among them. Nobody seemed surprised or interested or even particularly aware of their surroundings. Observe our people, the Empress said. Tell me what you see. Marcus watched a group of young Zephyrians engaged in what their guide identified as recreational activity. They moved through complex patterns that were undoubtedly beautiful and perfectly coordinated, but their faces showed no expression of enjoyment or effort. They performed their recreation with the same mechanical precision that characterized everything else in their society. They're not living, Marcus said quietly. They're just existing, going through the motions of life without any of the actual experience of being alive. How would you change this? Marcus thought about his garage back on Earth, the controlled chaos of tools and parts, the satisfaction of fixing something that others had written off as hopeless. He thought about the arguments with customers who insisted their cars couldn't be repaired, the joy of proving them wrong, the pride that came from taking something broken and making it work better than before. You need to break something, he said finally. Something important. Something that will force your people to choose between letting it stay broken or figuring out how to fix it themselves. The Empress's form flared with light that painted the surrounding architecture in impossible colors. You propose we sabotage our own perfection? I propose you give your people a reason to care again, Marcus replied. And I think I know exactly how to do it. He pulled out his phone, showing her videos he'd recorded of Earth. Not the polished promotional content that governments had prepared for first contact, but raw footage of humans being human. A street musician making beautiful music with a broken guitar. Children building sandcastles that would be washed away by the tide. Engineers celebrating after finally getting an experimental rocket to successfully explode in exactly the way they intended. Look at their faces, Marcus said. Really look. They're not perfect. They're struggling, failing, trying again. And they're more alive than anyone I've seen on your entire planet. The Empress studied the images for a long time, her crystalline form cycling through patterns of light that seemed to indicate deep thought. Finally, she spoke. Show me how to break paradise. Marcus Chen. Teach us how to be beautifully imperfect. Marcus grinned, the expression feeling strange on his face after days of being surrounded by beings who rarely showed emotion. Now that's a job I can handle. But I'm going to need some tools, and you're probably not going to like my methods. Our species is dying, the Empress replied. At this point, I'm willing to consider any solution, no matter how unorthodox. Marcus looked out at the perfect city stretching to the horizon, already formulating plans that would have horrified any reasonable engineer. In that case, Your Majesty, let's get creative. Marcus's first request nearly caused a diplomatic incident among the Zephyrian High Council. He wanted access to their central city management system, permission to modify their public transportation network, and complete authority to mess with things that weren't broken. The council members, beings of pure energy who existed primarily as geometric thought patterns, found the concept so alien that several of them temporarily lost cohesion during the debate. The human proposes deliberately introducing system failures, declared Councillor Arnithek, whose form resembled a constantly shifting mandala of mathematical equations. This violates every principle of civilized society. Our civilized society is dying, Empress Veltar reminded them, her diamond form casting prismatic reflections across the council chamber. Perhaps it is time to consider uncivilized solutions. Marcus stood in the center of the chamber feeling like a grease monkey who'd somehow wandered into a meeting of cosmic entities. Which he reflected was pretty much exactly what had happened. Look, I'm not asking to destroy your whole world. I just want to introduce a little chaos, give people problems they have to solve themselves. But why would they want to solve problems? Asked Councillor Lindar, whose form resembled a living symphony of light and sound. Our systems exist specifically to prevent problems from occurring. Because solving problems is what makes life worth living, Marcus replied. It's what gives people purpose, identity, pride. When you eliminate all challenges, you eliminate all the reasons to care about anything. He gestured toward the vast windows that showed the city below. You see perfection down there. I see a museum exhibit of what a living civilization used to look like. The debate continued for hours. Some council members supported the experiment, curious to see what might happen. Others opposed it violently, arguing that deliberately sabotaging their perfect society bordered on madness. In the end, Empress Veltar's authority prevailed. But Marcus could tell that many of the council members would be watching his efforts with deep suspicion. His first target was the city's transportation system. The Zephyrian transit network was a marvel of engineering that moved citizens seamlessly from location to location through a combination of matter transportation and predictive routing. Citizens never had to wait, never had to choose destinations, and never experienced delays. The system knew where they wanted to go before they did. Marcus spent a week studying the network's code, which existed as living mathematical constructs that evolved in real time. Working with Ambassador Zix, who had volunteered to assist despite obvious reservations, Marcus began introducing what he called beneficial inefficiencies. This subroutine, Marcus pointed to a stream of self-modifying algorithms, predicts passenger destinations based on behavioral analysis. What if we introduced a margin of error? You want the system to make mistakes? Zix asked, their mercury form rippling with confusion. I want the system to make interesting mistakes, Marcus corrected. Instead of taking citizens exactly where they intended to go, sometimes it takes them somewhere they didn't expect but might enjoy. Instead of predicting their needs perfectly, sometimes it gives them choices they have to make themselves. The first day of the modified transit system caused what the Zephyrian media called unprecedented confusion. Citizens found themselves deposited at art galleries when they'd intended to visit work centers, or taken to scenic overlooks when they'd planned routine errands. The initial response was bewilderment and frustration. But something interesting happened by the third day. Marcus received reports of citizens exploring the unexpected destinations rather than immediately correcting their routes. A group of technical specialists who'd been accidentally delivered to a cultural district spent hours examining artistic installations they'd never seen before. A family found themselves at a public garden they didn't know existed and decided to stay for an impromptu picnic. They're starting to adapt, Ambassador Zix observed during their daily progress meeting, but many citizens are still requesting manual route corrections. That's perfect, Marcus said, reviewing the data streams on his borrowed Zephyrian interface. The goal isn't to force exploration. The goal is to make it possible. Some people will choose the familiar path, and that's fine, but others will start choosing the unexpected one. His next project was more ambitious. Marcus wanted to modify the city's maintenance systems to occasionally break down in interesting ways. Not dangerous failures that could harm anyone, but minor malfunctions that would require citizen intervention to resolve. You want our public fountains to stop working? Councillor Arnthek demanded during the approval hearing. Our information kiosks to display incorrect data. Our climate control systems to fluctuate randomly. I want your people to have opportunities to fix things, Marcus explained. Right now, if something breaks, invisible systems repair it automatically. Citizens never get the chance to solve problems, to work together, to feel the satisfaction of making something work again. The implementation was gradual. Decorative fountains began experiencing minor pump irregularities that could be fixed by adjusting manual controls. Information displays occasionally showed outdated data that required citizens to verify information through alternative sources. Climate controls in public spaces sometimes needed manual adjustment to maintain optimal temperature. The initial response was predictable irritation, but within weeks, something remarkable began happening. Citizens started forming small groups to address the malfunctions. They shared knowledge about pump mechanisms and information verification. They developed informal networks to coordinate repairs and improvements. Marcus watched from the observation deck of the Empress's palace as a group of young Zephyrians worked together to repair a malfunctioning walkway. Instead of simply reporting the problem and waiting for automatic systems to address it, they had obtained tools and were physically adjusting the damaged panels themselves. Look at their faces, he said to the Empress, who stood beside him in thoughtful silence. When's the last time you saw expressions like that among your people? The young Zephyrians were animated in ways that Marcus had never observed before. They gestured enthusiastically as they discussed solutions, showed obvious pleasure when their repairs worked correctly, and displayed clear satisfaction when the walkway began functioning properly again. They appear to be experiencing what your species calls joy, the Empress observed. It has been centuries since I witnessed such emotional responses during routine activities. It's not routine anymore, Marcus pointed out. They're not following a predetermined script. They're improvising, creating, solving. They're being alive instead of just existing. But not everyone was pleased with the changes. A significant portion of the Zephyrian population found the new unpredictability deeply disturbing. Protests began forming, led by citizens who demanded the return of perfect efficiency. The movement called itself the Order of Pristine Function, and their demonstrations grew larger each day. We have achieved perfection, declared Lorwyn, a prominent order spokesperson during a public broadcast. Why would we voluntarily return to the chaos and uncertainty that plagued our ancestors? This human contamination of our society must be stopped. The protests created exactly the kind of problem Marcus had been hoping for, though not in the way he'd expected. The demonstrations forced citizens to choose sides, to engage with questions about what kind of society they wanted to live in. Public debates erupted spontaneously, something that hadn't happened in Zephyrian culture for over a millennium. The irony is beautiful, Marcus told Ambassador Zix as they watched footage of citizens arguing passionately about the merits of efficiency versus spontaneity. They're protesting chaos by creating more chaos. They're demanding order through the most disorderly means possible. You planned this, Zix accused, though their tone suggested curiosity rather than anger. I hoped for it, Marcus admitted. Conflict isn't necessarily bad. It's how societies grow, how they figure out who they want to be. Your people have been living in consensus for so long that they've forgotten how to disagree constructively. The debates were indeed constructive, even when they became heated. Citizens who had never questioned their perfect society began examining its foundations, considering alternatives, proposing modifications. The very act of choosing whether to support or oppose the changes had awakened something that had been dormant in Zephyrian culture for generations. We are observing the birth of politics, the Empress told Marcus. During one of their evening conversations, our people are developing opinions, forming factions, engaging in persuasion and compromise, concepts that we had relegated to ancient history. Politics gets a bad reputation, Marcus said, but at its core, it's just people figuring out how to live together when they disagree about important things. It's messy and frustrating and inefficient, but it's also proof that people care enough about their society to fight for their vision of it. The changes were accelerating beyond Marcus's original plans. Citizens were beginning to modify other systems on their own initiative, introducing elements of choice and uncertainty into aspects of Zephyrian life that had been standardized for centuries. Art installations that responded differently to each viewer, food preparation systems that created unique variations instead of identical meals, educational programs that adapted to student curiosity rather than predetermined curricula. They're becoming creative, the Empress observed with wonder. Our people are choosing to make their world less predictable, less efficient, less perfect, and they appear to be happier for it. Marcus nodded, watching a group of Zephyrian children playing what appeared to be an improvised game with modified maintenance tools. They were laughing, a sound that had become increasingly common in the city's public spaces. There's just one problem, he said. I'm pretty sure some of your people are planning to stop Forza permanently. Marcus's suspicions proved correct when Ambassador Zix burst into his workshop. Quarters at what passed for dawn on the Zephyrian homeworld. The alien's mercury form was agitated, their usual fluid grace replaced by rapid, jerky movements that made reality blur around their edges. You must leave immediately, Zix announced without preamble. The Order of Pristine Function has issued what your species would call a declaration of war. Marcus looked up from the transportation routing system he'd been modifying to introduce random, scenic detours. War? I thought you people had eliminated conflict from your society. We had, Zix replied grimly, until you taught us how to care about things enough to fight for them. The Order has decided that your influence threatens the fundamental stability of our civilization. They've convinced approximately 30% of the population that the only way to save Zephyrian society is to remove you and reverse all modifications to our systems. And the other 70% are split between those who support your work and those who remain undecided. The situation is unprecedented. Marcus saved his work and stood, stretching muscles that had grown stiff from hours spent manipulating alien technology. So I've successfully introduced political conflict to a species that had achieved perfect harmony. I'm honestly not sure if I should be proud or terrified. Both would be appropriate, Zix said. The Order has developed something we have not seen in millennia: organized opposition. They have formed committees, established hierarchies, and begun coordinating activities across multiple population centers. They are becoming increasingly sophisticated in their methods. Outside Marcus's quarters, the city hummed with an energy that hadn't existed when he'd first arrived. Citizens moved through the streets with purpose that seemed genuinely their own, rather than algorithmically determined. Groups gathered in public spaces for spontaneous discussions. Children played games that appeared to have been invented moments earlier, but tension was building alongside the newfound vitality. Marcus could see it in the way certain citizens avoided others, the formation of distinct social clusters, the occasional heated arguments that erupted in previously harmonious gathering places. Show me what the Order is planning, Marcus said. Zix led him through corridors that rearranged themselves to provide the most direct route to the intelligence center. The Zephyrian surveillance system was capable of monitoring every citizen's activities, though it typically only recorded data rather than actively observing. Recent events had changed that protocol. The main display showed a three-dimensional map of the city, with activity patterns highlighted in different colors. Areas of green indicated normal citizen behavior, yellow showed moderate deviation from established patterns, and red marked significant organizational activity. There was a lot of red, and it was concentrated around key infrastructure points. The Order is attempting to gain control of primary system nodes, explained Captain Morden, whose crystalline tree form was dimmed with concern. They believe that if they can restore original programming to critical systems, they can eliminate the chaos you have introduced. Marcus studied the patterns, recognizing the strategic thinking behind the Order's movements. They're not just trying to fix individual systems. They're planning a coordinated restoration of the entire network. If they succeed, they won't just undo my modifications. They'll probably lock the systems against future changes. Worse, Zix added, they've begun developing what they call purity protocols. Citizens who refuse to support the restoration will be classified as contaminated and isolated from normal society. They want to quarantine anyone who's learned to think for themselves, Marcus realized. That's not just reversing the changes. That's actively preventing your species from ever developing beyond perfect stagnation again. The irony wasn't lost on him. In trying to save Zephyrian civilization by introducing choice and uncertainty, he had created the conditions for a faction to choose the elimination of choice itself. It was like teaching someone to use tools and then watching them forge chains. There's something else, Captain Morden said, manipulating the display to show a different view. The Order has been studying your modifications extensively. They have begun to understand not just what you changed, but how you think. They are developing countermeasures specifically designed to neutralize human-style problem-solving approaches. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ambient temperature. They're learning to think like me in order to stop me from thinking like me. That's actually brilliant and terrifying. Your influence has been more profound than anticipated, Zix observed. By demonstrating alternative approaches to existence, you have not only inspired creativity and independence among our people, you have also inspired opposition, organization, and strategic thinking among those who reject change. I've created an arms race between order and chaos, Marcus muttered, and I'm not sure which side I'm rooting for anymore. That evening, Empress Veltar summoned Marcus to her private chambers, a space that existed in dimensions human perception could barely process. The geometric impossibilities that surrounded them shifted constantly, creating patterns that seemed to respond to the Empress's emotional state. The situation has become more complex than either of us anticipated, she said without preamble. The Order's activities are accelerating social divisions, but they are also driving innovation among their opponents. Citizens who support your modifications are developing new techniques for protecting and enhancing the changes you introduced. Marcus sat in what his brain interpreted as a chair, though it felt more like being supported by crystallized starlight. So both sides are getting more sophisticated. The Order is learning to organize and strategize while your supporters are learning to innovate and adapt. That's actually encouraging, in a weird way. How is escalating conflict encouraging? Because it means both groups care enough about their vision of society to work for it, Marcus explained. For the first time in centuries, your people have something worth fighting for, even if they disagree about what that something is. The Empress's form shifted through patterns of light that seemed to indicate deep thought. The Order has requested a formal audience. They wish to present their case for removing you and restoring original system parameters. Are you going to grant it? I am considering allowing a public debate. You would present the case for continued modification, while Order representatives would argue for restoration. The entire population would observe and ultimately choose which path our society follows. Marcus felt his stomach drop. You want me to debate the future of your entire civilization? In front of everyone? Against people who've spent months studying how to counter everything I might say? I want my people to choose their own future, the Empress replied. True choice requires understanding all available options. If your ideas cannot survive examination and debate, perhaps they should not survive at all. And if the Order wins, if the population chooses perfect stagnation over chaotic growth, then we will have learned that democracy itself was the gift you brought us, even if they choose to use it only once. Marcus spent the next several days preparing for what might be the most important argument of his life. The debate would be broadcast to every Zephyrian citizen, giving them their first opportunity to collectively decide the direction of their society. The Order had chosen their most articulate spokesperson, a being called Zurith whose crystalline form could project mathematical proofs directly into observers' consciousness. Your fighting a battle of pure logic against beings who think in mathematical absolutes. Ambassador Zix warned during one of their preparation sessions. Zurith will present optimization algorithms that prove perfect efficiency is superior to chaotic uncertainty. How will you counter mathematical certainty with human intuition? Marcus thought about his grandfather's garage, where he'd first learned that the best solutions often came from trying impossible things, the same way I've always solved impossible problems. By cheating. Explain. Zurith is going to argue that perfection is better than imperfection, efficiency better than waste, certainty better than uncertainty, and mathematically they'll be absolutely right, so I'm not going to argue against their math. Then how will you win? Marcus grinned, the expression feeling strange after days of nervous preparation. I'm going to prove that being right isn't the same thing as being alive. The Great Assembly was unlike anything in Zephyrian history. For the first time in 3 millennia, every citizen would gather in one location to make a collective decision about their society's future. The venue was a vast amphitheater that existed in folded space, allowing billions of beings to attend while occupying an area no larger than a city park. Marcus stood backstage. If the concept of backstage applied to a structure that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously. His hands were shaking, which he found oddly comforting. Fear meant he cared about the outcome, and caring was exactly what he'd been trying to teach the Zephyrians. The consciousness-sharing protocol is ready, Ambassador Zix reported, their mercury form rippling with nervous energy. Every citizen will experience temporary human-style neural processing during your presentation. Are you certain this is wise? I'm certain it's necessary, Marcus replied, checking his notes one last time. Though I should probably mention that I've never given a speech to an entire alien civilization before, so I'm mostly improvising. That seems appropriate, given your message. Empress Veltar appeared beside them, her diamond form refracting the amphitheater's ambient light into patterns that suggested both hope and concern. Zurith has finished their preparation. The Order's argument will be mathematically flawless, philosophically consistent, and logically irrefutable. Sounds about right, Marcus said. Good thing I'm not planning to be logical. The debate format was simple. Each side would present their case, the population would experience Marcus's consciousness-sharing demonstration, and then citizens would vote on whether to maintain the modifications or restore original system parameters. The results would be binding and irreversible. Zurith spoke first, their crystalline form projecting equations and proofs directly into the minds of every observer. Their argument was elegantly devastating. Perfect efficiency eliminated waste. Absolute predictability prevented suffering, and complete optimization maximized well-being for all citizens. They demonstrated mathematically that chaos introduced variables that decreased overall societal function, that uncertainty created anxiety and confusion, and that allowing choice inevitably led to conflict and suboptimal outcomes. Observe the evidence of human influence, Zurith declared, their voice resonating through dimensions that carried pure mathematical truth. Transportation delays have increased by 15%. Resource allocation efficiency has decreased by 8%. Social harmony indices have dropped to levels not seen since our pre-civilized era. These are measurable decreases in the quality of Zephyrian existence. The presentation included holographic displays showing the statistical impact of Marcus's modifications. Every graph, every chart, every data point supported Zurith's conclusion. The changes had made Zephyrian society objectively worse by every metric their civilization had used to measure success for 3,000 years. The human asks us to embrace imperfection, to choose struggle over ease, to accept uncertainty over knowledge, Zurith continued. But why would any rational being voluntarily decrease their quality of life? Why would we choose inefficiency when we have achieved perfection? The Order's spokesperson concluded by projecting a vision of restored Zephyrian society. Citizens moving through their daily lives with renewed grace and efficiency, systems functioning at optimal levels, social harmony restored, and the anxiety and conflict of recent months eliminated forever. The presentation was mathematically perfect, logically unassailable, and utterly convincing. Even Marcus had to admit that by every rational measure, Zurith was completely correct. Then it was his turn. Marcus walked to the center of the vast amphitheater, a single human figure surrounded by billions of alien minds. He carried no notes, no holographic displays, no mathematical proofs. Instead, he activated the consciousness-sharing protocol he'd prepared. "Before I say anything," Marcus announced, his voice amplified across the dimensional fold, "I want you to experience what I'm experiencing right now." The effect was immediate and profound. Every Zephyrian in the amphitheater suddenly felt the flutter of nervousness in what humans called a stomach. The racing sensation of a heart-pumping adrenaline, the strange mixture of fear and excitement that came with facing an uncertain outcome. For the first time in millennia, they experienced doubt, hope, and the terrifying possibility of failure. "This is what it feels like to be human right now," Marcus said, his words carrying new weight because his audience could feel the emotion behind them. "I'm scared. I might fail. I might say the wrong thing, make the wrong argument, disappoint everyone who believed in me. I have no idea how this will turn out." He paused, letting them absorb the unfamiliar, sensations of uncertainty and vulnerability. "And I wouldn't trade this feeling for all the perfect efficiency in the universe." Marcus began walking through the amphitheater, his path visible to every observer through the dimensional projection system. "Zurith is absolutely right about everything they said. Your society is measurably less efficient than it was before I arrived. You're experiencing conflict, confusion, and uncertainty. By every logical standard, you're worse off than you were." The consciousness-sharing protocol was working. Marcus could sense the audience's confusion as they experienced the strange human combination of acknowledging problems while simultaneously feeling energized by them. "But here's what the numbers don't show," Marcus continued. 3 months ago, how many of you woke up excited about the day ahead? How many of you looked forward to discovering something new, solving an interesting problem, or having a conversation that might change your mind about something important?" He gestured toward the orders section of the amphitheater. "How many of you felt proud of something you accomplished through your own effort, rather than something that was achieved automatically by systems designed to guarantee success?" The shared consciousness experience was allowing the audience to feel Marcus's passionate conviction, his genuine care for their civilization's future, and his absolute certainty that being alive was more important than being efficient. "Zurith wants to restore perfection," Marcus said, "and perfection is exactly what it sounds like, the end. Perfect means finished, complete, with no room for growth or change or discovery. Perfect is the opposite of alive." He activated another protocol he'd prepared, sharing memories of human experiences with the assembled population. They felt the satisfaction of fixing a broken engine, the joy of solving a difficult puzzle, the pride of helping a friend overcome a challenge, the excitement of discovering something unexpected. "You want to know why humans never achieved perfect efficiency?" Marcus asked. "Because we figured out that the journey is more important than the destination. The struggle is more valuable than the solution. The possibility of failure makes success meaningful." The consciousness sharing was showing the Zephyrians what it felt like to value process over outcome, growth over stasis, becoming over being. Many of them were experiencing culture shock as their neural patterns temporarily reorganized around human-style thinking. "Zurith is offering you eternal peace," Marcus continued. "No more conflict, no more uncertainty, no more anxiety or doubt or fear. And they're right that life would be easier without those things. But it wouldn't be life anymore. It would be a beautiful, efficient, perfect form of death." He reached the center of the amphitheater again, standing beneath the dimensional focal point where every citizen could observe him directly. "I'm not asking you to choose chaos over order," Marcus said. "I'm asking you to choose growth over stagnation, possibility over certainty, life over perfection. I'm asking you to embrace being beautifully, gloriously, magnificently imperfect." The consciousness-sharing protocol reached its climax, flooding every Zephyrian mind with the full spectrum of human emotional experience. They felt curiosity, wonder, determination, joy, frustration, hope, and dozens of other sensations that their perfectly optimized society had eliminated from daily existence. "This is what you're voting on," Marcus concluded. "Not whether to be efficient or inefficient, but whether to be finished or to keep becoming. Whether to exist in perfect stasis or to live in imperfect motion." The protocol ended, returning every Zephyrian to their normal consciousness. But the memory of what they'd experienced remained, giving them a reference point for understanding what they might be choosing to embrace or reject. Marcus walked back to his position, his part complete. The vote would happen immediately, with results displayed in real time as billions of citizens made their choice. The numbers began appearing on displays throughout the amphitheater, Marcus watched as percentages shifted, populations were counted, and the future of an entire civilization was decided by democratic process. For the first time since arriving in Zephyrian space, Marcus had no idea what would happen next. And despite the fear that uncertainty brought, he found himself smiling. "Whatever happens," he said to Ambassador Zix, "they're making this choice themselves. That's already more alive than they've been in 3,000 years." The final results were about to be announced, and Marcus realized he was holding his breath. The irony was perfect. He was experiencing exactly the kind of anxious uncertainty he'd been trying to teach the Zephyrians to value. The numbers shifted on the amphitheater displays like a living thing, percentages climbing and falling as billions of votes were processed across the Zephyrian homeworld. Marcus watched the real-time tallies with a mixture of fascination and terror, aware that he was witnessing democracy in action among a species that had never needed to vote on anything before. Initially, the results seemed to favor the order of pristine function. The Restore Original Parameters option held a steady lead of nearly 60%, which made sense given that most Zephyrians had spent their entire lives in perfectly optimized conditions. The sudden experience of human consciousness had been shocking, and many citizens were voting to eliminate the possibility of experiencing such chaos again. But something interesting happened as votes continued to pour in from different regions and demographics. Younger Zephyrians, those who had lived their entire lives in absolute perfection, were voting overwhelmingly to maintain the modifications. The consciousness-sharing experience had given them their first taste of genuine feeling, and many seemed reluctant to give it up. "The youth demographics are fascinating," Ambassador Zix observed, their mercury form rippling with nervous energy. "Citizens who have never experienced anything but perfect efficiency are choosing uncertainty at rates approaching 80%. They don't have as much invested in the old system," Marcus replied, watching as geographic voting patterns revealed complex divisions across the planet. When you've never struggled for anything, the idea of struggle can seem appealing. When you've never had to make choices, the opportunity to choose feels like freedom. The older populations were voting more conservatively, but not uniformly. Citizens who held positions in scientific research or creative fields were supporting continued modification at surprisingly high rates, while those in administrative or maintenance roles favored restoration. "Look at the professional breakdowns," Empress Veltar pointed out, her diamond form cycling through patterns that seemed to reflect the shifting vote tallies. "Citizens whose work involves problem-solving or innovation are embracing uncertainty, while those whose roles focus on maintenance and optimization prefer predictability." Marcus found that breakdown encouraging. The people who are used to thinking creatively want more opportunities to be creative. The people who are used to following established procedures want to keep following them. That makes sense. But the most surprising pattern emerged when the results were analyzed by recent behavioral changes. Citizens who had actively participated in the system modifications, whether by forming repair groups, exploring unexpected destinations, or engaging in spontaneous debates, were voting to maintain changes by margins approaching 90%. They've tasted agency, Marcus realized. Once you've experienced having real control over your environment, real choice about your actions, it's almost impossible to voluntarily give that up. The vote totals continued to fluctuate as more regions reported their results. Rural areas favored restoration, while urban centers leaned toward maintaining modifications. Citizens who lived in heavily automated environments wanted to preserve automation, while those who had more direct interaction with their surroundings preferred increased unpredictability. As the counting neared completion, the margins grew impossibly close. With 95% of votes tallied, the difference between the two options was less than 2%, well within the margin for final vote adjustments. "This is exactly what I was hoping for," Marcus said, surprising everyone around him. "You hoped for a deadlocked election?" Zurith asked, having approached the viewing area to observe the final results. The Order spokesperson's crystalline form projected mathematical uncertainty for the first time Marcus had observed. "I hoped for engagement," Marcus replied. "Look at what's happening. Your entire population is passionately invested in the future of their society. They're debating, arguing, trying to convince others to support their position. Half of them are experiencing disappointment and frustration for the first time in centuries, while the other half are feeling hope and anticipation." He gestured toward the displays showing not just vote totals, but real-time social interaction data. Citizens were gathering in public spaces to discuss the results, forming groups based on shared perspectives, and engaging in the kind of spirited political discourse that had been absent from Zephyrian culture for millennia. Regardless of which option wins, Marcus continued, your people are now invested in the outcome. They care about something beyond their individual comfort and optimization. They're thinking about society as something they can shape rather than something that simply exists around them. The final votes were processed, and the results appeared on displays throughout the amphitheater. The margin of victory was less than 1%, with maintain modifications edging out restore parameters by the narrowest possible margin. The immediate response was electric. Citizens throughout the amphitheater erupted in celebrations, protests, cheers, and arguments. For the first time in recorded Zephyrian history, a significant portion of the population was experiencing genuine disappointment, while another portion felt triumphant joy. The vote is complete, Empress Veltar announced, her voice carrying across dimensional folds to reach every citizen. The modifications will be maintained, and our society will continue its evolution toward increased uncertainty and choice. Zureth's crystalline form shifted through patterns that seemed to indicate profound confusion. This outcome is statistically impossible, they declared. No rational population would choose inefficiency over optimization. Maybe rationality isn't the only factor worth considering, Marcus suggested. Maybe your people decided that being alive was more important than being rational. But the aftermath of the vote revealed complexities that Marcus hadn't anticipated. The narrow margin meant that nearly half the population was deeply unhappy with the result, and many of them were not prepared to accept defeat gracefully. We're receiving reports of organized resistance in 12 major cities, Captain Morden announced, their crystalline tree form displaying tactical information in real time. Order supporters are attempting to override local system modifications through direct physical intervention. They're sabotaging the modifications? Marcus asked. More than that, Ambassador Zix replied grimly. They're attempting to create their own separate communities with original parameters restored. They want to maintain perfect efficiency for themselves, while allowing the rest of society to pursue chaos. Marcus felt a chill of realization. They're seceding, creating their own version of Zephyrian civilization. The implications were staggering. Instead of a unified society choosing a single path forward, the Zephyrians were fragmenting into separate communities based on their philosophical preferences. Cities were dividing along ideological lines, with some districts maintaining the modifications while others worked to restore original parameters. This is unprecedented, the Empress said, her diamond form cycling through patterns that suggested deep concern. Our species has never experienced fundamental social division. We have no frameworks for managing a civilization where different populations choose different organizing principles. Welcome to politics, Marcus said wryly. This is what happens when people care enough about their beliefs to act on them, but not everyone agrees about what those beliefs should be. The situation escalated rapidly. Order communities began restricting access to citizens who had embraced the modifications, arguing that exposure to chaos contaminated their carefully maintained efficiency. Meanwhile, modification communities started developing new innovations at an accelerated pace, creating technologies and social structures that diverged increasingly from traditional Zephyrian norms. You've created a schism, Zureth accused during an emergency meeting called to address the growing crisis. Your influence has divided our species into incompatible factions. I've created choice, Marcus corrected. Your people are choosing which version of society they want to live in. That's not a bug, it's a feature. But how can a civilization function when its population cannot agree on fundamental principles? Marcus thought about Earth's long history of political divisions, religious differences, and ideological conflicts. With difficulty, he admitted, but also with incredible creativity, innovation, and growth. Conflict forces societies to evolve, to develop new solutions, to constantly re-examine their assumptions. You're describing permanent instability, Zureth protested. I'm describing life, Marcus replied. Real, messy, complicated, beautiful life. The crisis deepened as both factions began developing increasingly sophisticated approaches to their chosen lifestyles. Order communities achieved new levels of efficiency and optimization, while modification communities created innovations that pushed the boundaries of what Zephyrian technology could accomplish. They're both succeeding, Empress Veltar observed during a private meeting with Marcus. Each faction is achieving remarkable results according to their chosen metrics. The Order communities are more efficient than ever, while the modification communities are more creative than we've been in millennia. So what's the problem? 5 years after the Great Schism, as historians were already calling it, Marcus stood on the observation deck of a research station, positioned between the two major population centers of the Zephyrian homeworld. Through the transparent walls he could see both civilizations simultaneously. The Order cities gleaming with perfect geometric harmony to the north, and the modification territories sprawling in organic, ever-changing patterns to the south. The results of the experiment had exceeded everyone's expectations, including his own. The productivity metrics are fascinating, Ambassador Zix reported, their mercury form more animated than Marcus had ever observed. Order communities have achieved efficiency levels 20% higher than pre-modification baselines, while modification communities have generated more technological innovations in 5 years than our entire species produced in the previous century. Both societies were thriving, but in completely different ways. The Order territories had perfected their vision of optimized existence, creating cities that functioned like living organisms, anticipating every need, and eliminating every source of friction or uncertainty. Citizens there lived lives of unprecedented ease and satisfaction, their days flowing with the kind of graceful purpose that had originally attracted Marcus to Zephyrian culture. Meanwhile, the modification territories had become something entirely new. Their cities changed configuration daily, their citizens pursued careers that hadn't existed the week before, and their social structures evolved so rapidly that visitors needed constant orientation updates. They had embraced uncertainty so completely that predictability itself had become a rare and valued commodity. "Have you seen the latest exchange programs?" Empress Veltar asked, joining them at the observation point. Her diamond form had evolved over the years, now incorporating flowing elements that seemed inspired by both Order efficiency and modification creativity. Marcus reviewed the data she projected. Order citizens are volunteering to spend time in modification territories, and vice versa, she confirmed. Young people especially seem drawn to experience the alternative lifestyle temporarily. Order youth want to feel the excitement of uncertainty, while modification youth are curious about the peace of perfect optimization. The exchange programs had been one of the most unexpected developments. Despite the fundamental philosophical differences between the two societies, citizens had begun requesting opportunities to experience life in the other system. The exchanges were typically brief, rarely lasting more than a few weeks, but they had created a new form of cultural interaction that neither side had anticipated. "Look at this," Captain Morden announced. Their crystalline tree form now integrated with both digital efficiency nodes and organic growth patterns. "We're receiving requests from other Zephyrian worlds to implement similar experiments." The success of the homeworld's dual society experiment had attracted attention from across the Zephyrian Empire. 47 star systems had sent delegations to study the results, and several had requested assistance in developing their own versions of the Order modification framework. "Each world is adapting the concept differently," Marcus observed. Reviewing reports from the various delegations, some are creating geographical divisions like you did here. Others are establishing temporal rotations where entire populations alternate between order and chaos on regular schedules, and a few are developing individual choice systems where citizens can switch between societies as desired. "Your influence has spread far beyond what any of us anticipated," the Empress noted. "You didn't just save our species from extinction. You gave us a new form of evolution." But the most remarkable development had emerged from an unexpected source: the children born after the schism. Young Zephyrians who had grown up witnessing both societies were developing hybrid approaches that combined elements of order and chaos in ways their parents had considered impossible. "The third generation is creating something entirely new," Ambassador Zix explained, showing Marcus footage of young Zephyrians who moved fluidly between order and modification territories, equally comfortable with perfect efficiency and creative uncertainty. They're not choosing one approach or the other. They're synthesizing both into integrated lifestyles. Marcus watched videos of Zephyrian teenagers who would spend mornings in order districts learning perfect coordination and optimal decision-making, then shift to modification territories for afternoons of creative exploration and spontaneous innovation. They seemed to treat both philosophies as tools to be used as circumstances required, rather than mutually exclusive worldviews. They're bilingual, Marcus realized. Fluent in both order and chaos, capable of switching between them as the situation demands. More than that, the Empress said. They're creating hybrid technologies, social structures and art forms that incorporate elements from both societies. Look at this. She projected examples of the hybrid creations, architectural structures that maintained perfect efficiency while constantly reconfiguring themselves in response to user needs, transportation systems that optimized routes while providing opportunities for serendipitous discovery, and educational programs that taught both systematic thinking and creative problem-solving as complementary skills. This is what I was hoping for, Marcus said, feeling a satisfaction deeper than he'd experienced since arriving in Zephyrian space. Not the triumph of one approach over another, but the development of new approaches that transcended the original limitations. The hybrid generation was also producing unprecedented solutions to challenges that had stymied both pure order and pure modification communities. They had developed technologies that were both perfectly efficient and endlessly adaptable, social systems that provided stability without stagnation, and cultural expressions that celebrated both harmony and diversity. They've learned to be selectively perfect, Captain Morden observed. Perfect when perfection serves their goals, imperfect when imperfection opens new possibilities. Marcus thought about his own journey, from a mechanic in Queens to an advisor to an alien Empress. He had learned to navigate the sophisticated complexities of Zephyrian society, while maintaining his human perspective on the value of beautiful imperfection. In a way, he had become his own version of the hybrid generation. There's something I need to tell you, the Empress said, her diamond form shifting to patterns that seemed to indicate important news. The Council has been monitoring Earth during your absence. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. What kind of monitoring? Beneficial observation, she assured him quickly. Your species has made remarkable progress since our first contact. The knowledge that other intelligent life exists has accelerated human innovation and cooperation in ways your scientists didn't predict. She projected images of Earth that took Marcus's breath away. Space elevators connected the planet to orbital construction platforms, where humans and alien engineering teams worked together on projects that seemed impossible. Cities had been redesigned using principles borrowed from Zephyrian architecture, but adapted to human needs and aesthetics. Most remarkably, international cooperation had reached unprecedented levels as humanity focused on preparing for its role in galactic civilization. We've been sharing selective technologies and scientific knowledge, the Empress continued. Nothing that would disrupt human cultural development, but enough to help your species address challenges like climate change, resource management, and interplanetary expansion. You've been uplifting us, Marcus said, using the science fiction term that seemed to fit the situation. We've been learning from you, she corrected. Human creativity has inspired innovations throughout the Zephyrian Empire. Your species' approach to problem-solving has been studied, adapted, and implemented across 47 star systems. Marcus realized that the exchange had been mutual from the beginning. While he had been teaching the Zephyrians to embrace imperfection, they had been teaching humanity to think beyond planetary limitations. Both species had evolved through the contact, becoming something more than either could have achieved alone. The Council has a proposal for you, the Empress said. We would like you to serve as an ambassador between our species, helping to facilitate the kind of beneficial cultural exchange that has proven so valuable for both civilizations. Marcus looked out at the thriving dual society of the Zephyrian homeworld, then at the images of a rapidly advancing Earth. Both worlds were becoming more than they had been, growing in directions that neither could have predicted. I started this journey thinking I was helping you save your species, he said. But what we actually did was help both our species become something new. Indeed, the Empress agreed. The question now is whether you're ready to help us discover what else might be possible. Marcus thought about his grandfather's garage, where he had first learned that impossible problems usually just required creative solutions and a willingness to break a few rules. He thought about the Zephyrian children who were learning to be selectively perfect, and the human children who were growing up in a universe full of infinite possibilities. "Let's find out," he said, and meant it. Outside the observation station, both Zephyrian societies continued their parallel evolution, creating new forms of existence that honored their species' capacity for both perfect order and beautiful chaos. And somewhere in the space between certainty and uncertainty, between efficiency and creativity, between order and chaos, the future was taking shape in ways that no one could predict, which was exactly as it should be.